Right now, somewhere over the northern plains, the sky is loading a weapon. A slow-moving front is dragging across Montana and Wyoming as we speak, and within hours it is going to detonate into a line of storms capable of throwing baseball-sized hail through your windshield and knocking down power lines for hundreds of miles. This is not a distant possibility. This is happening this week, and it is only the beginning of a stretch of dangerous weather that meteorologists are watching unfold across the country over the next several weeks. If you live anywhere from the Dakotas to the Great Lakes, from the southern plains to the Gulf Coast, you need to hear this, because what's coming isn't a single storm, it's a pattern, and patterns are far more dangerous than any one event, because they don't let up. Let's start with what's happening right now, because the setup unfolding this week is genuinely serious. A slow-moving frontal boundary is currently stretched across the northern plains and into the upper Midwest, and it is acting as the ignition point for a round of thunderstorms that forecasters expect to strengthen into severe territory through the overnight hours. The greatest risk zone stretches from the high plains of Montana and Wyoming eastward into southern Minnesota, and the two hazards meteorologists are most concerned about are large, damaging hail and destructive straight-line winds. These aren't garden-variety summer thunderstorms. The atmosphere over this corridor right now has the kind of instability and wind shear that allows storms to organize, strengthen, and sustain themselves over long distances rather than fizzling out after 20 minutes like a typical pop-up shower. And here's the part that should really get your attention. This threat doesn't stay put. As we move through the week, that severe weather risk is forecast to slide farther south and east, stretching from the upper Great Lakes down into the Central Plains. In other words, if you dodge it on day one, it may still be coming for you on day two. This is a multi-day, multi-region event, not a single afternoon of bad weather that blows through and disappears. States across the central and northern U.S. need to be thinking about this as a rolling threat that could touch their communities more than once over just a few days. Now let's talk about why this is happening, because understanding the mechanics makes it a lot easier to take seriously. A powerful upper-level ridge, essentially a dome of high pressure parked high in the atmosphere, is expanding and strengthening over the central United States this week. Underneath a ridge like this, air sinks, skies often stay clear, and heat builds relentlessly at the surface. That sounds like it should mean calm weather, but it actually does the opposite along the edges of the ridge, where it collides with cooler, more unstable air, pushing in from the north and west. That collision zone is exactly where thunderstorms explode with the most violence, because you've got a reservoir of scorching, humid air sitting right next to cooler, drier air, and nature does not like that kind of imbalance. It resolves it fast and often destructively in the form of severe thunderstorms. Layered on top of that collision is the heat itself, and this is where the story gets even more dangerous, because the storms are not the only threat this week. A major and, in some areas, historic heat dome has settled in across a large stretch of the country, and it is not going anywhere quickly. Tens of millions of people are currently under major to extreme heat risk levels, stretching from the deep south up into parts of the upper Midwest and as far east as the Mid-Atlantic. This isn't just uncomfortable weather. Heat like this is the deadliest form of extreme weather in the United States, killing more people in an average year than tornadoes, hurricanes, and lightning combined. High humidity is going to keep overnight temperatures from dropping much at all in a lot of these areas, which matters more than people realize because the human body needs those cooler nighttime hours to recover from daytime heat stress. When the low temperature at night barely dips into the mid-70s and urban areas stay near 80 degrees until sunrise, that recovery window disappears and the health risk compounds day after day. So here is the picture as of right now. A dangerous, severe weather corridor is rolling across the plains and upper Midwest with large hail and destructive winds. To the south and east, a brutal, record-challenging heat dome is trapping extreme heat and humidity over more than two-thirds of the country. And out west, the very same atmospheric pattern that's cooling parts of the country temporarily is also being followed by a shift that will bring rising temperatures and increasingly dangerous fire weather conditions back to Utah, Colorado, and Arizona, right as ongoing wildfires there are already testing the limits of firefighting crews. Three separate hazards, tied together by the same broad pattern, all active at the same time across different parts of the country. That's not a coincidence, and it's not an exaggeration. That's simply what a highly amplified summer weather pattern looks like when it locks into place. Now let's talk about what happens after this week, because the pattern isn't finished, not even close. Forecasters are already tracking the potential for another round of significant severe weather to develop as this pattern evolves further into the following week. Confidence in the exact timing and location that far out is still limited, and it's important to be honest about that. Meteorologists at this range describe the probability with real caution rather than certainty. But the ingredients being tracked point toward a corridor stretching from near the Canadian border through the Great Lakes and potentially into the Northeast as we head into early next week. If those ingredients come together the way some of the modeling suggests, we could be looking at another multi-day stretch of organized severe thunderstorms capable of producing large hail, damaging winds, and a risk of tornadoes across a heavily populated part of the country. There's also a flooding threat woven into all of this that deserves just as much attention as the wind and hail. Because water, not wind, is often what actually kills people in these events. Portions of the upper Mississippi Valley and the upper Great Lakes are already sitting in a slight risk zone for excessive rainfall, with widespread totals of 1 to 2 inches expected and localized pockets that could see 3 inches or more in a very short window. That might not sound like much on paper, but soils in some of these areas are already saturated from recent rounds of rain, which means the ground simply can't absorb much more before water starts pooling in streets, backing up storm drains, and rising in low-lying areas. Flash flooding doesn't need a hurricane to become deadly. It just needs saturated ground, heavy rain falling faster than it can drain, and people caught off guard, often while driving through water that looks shallower than it actually is. Now, let's zoom out even further because there's another piece of this puzzle that a lot of people aren't watching closely enough right now, and that's the tropics. We are currently sitting in the middle of the Atlantic hurricane season, which runs from June through the end of November, and this year's outlook has been an interesting one. Forecasters at NOAA and at Colorado State University are both leaning toward a below-average season in terms of total storm count, largely because a developing El Niño pattern tends to increase wind shear across the Atlantic, and wind shear is one of the best natural defenses against tropical storm formation. It essentially rips storms apart before they can organize. The current outlook calls for somewhere in the range of 8 to 14 named storms, with 3 to 6 becoming hurricanes, and as few as 1 to 3 reaching major hurricane strength. Compare that to a long-term average of around 14 named storms and 7 hurricanes, and you can see why forecasters are calling this a quieter than normal year. But here is the warning that every single hurricane expert repeats year after year for good reason, and it's worth repeating here too. A below-average season doesn't mean a safe season. It only takes one storm making landfall in the wrong place to turn a quiet year into a catastrophic one. The Atlantic Basin has already produced its first named storm of the year, Tropical Storm Arthur, which formed off the Texas Gulf Coast back in June before weakening and eventually dissipating. But even after it fell apart as an organized storm, its remnant moisture kept causing problems, tracking across Louisiana with significant, in some spots, life-threatening flooding risk, before spreading northeast into Georgia and the Carolinas. That's an important lesson in itself. A storm doesn't need to be a hurricane to be dangerous. It doesn't even need to still be a storm at all. Even the leftover moisture from a dissipated system can dump enough rain to flood entire communities. Right now, the Atlantic Basin itself is relatively quiet, with forecasters watching a couple of low-probability areas for potential development, including a small chance of something trying to organize over the Bay of Campeche in the Gulf. Elsewhere in the world, the tropics are anything but quiet. A powerful typhoon is currently churning through the western Pacific near the Mariana Islands, with maximum sustained winds reported around 150 miles per hour. A reminder that even in a year forecast to be quieter than normal in the Atlantic, tropical systems elsewhere on the planet are still capable of reaching extreme, historic intensity. The ocean has more than enough stored heat this year to fuel powerful storms wherever the right atmospheric conditions line up, and forecasters are increasingly focused not just on how many storms form, but on how quickly they can intensify once they do. Data going back to 1980 shows that Atlantic storms are increasingly prone to a process called rapid intensification, where sustained winds jump by 35 miles per hour or more in just 24 hours. In the most extreme cases, that jump can be 58 miles per hour or more in a single day. That kind of rapid strengthening is exactly what makes modern storms so dangerous, because it can turn what looks like a modest tropical storm on your radar screen into a major hurricane by the time it makes landfall, sometimes with barely enough warning to finish preparing. So when you put this entire picture together, severe thunderstorms rolling across the plains and Midwest this week, with a real risk of a repeat performance heading into next week, a dangerous and prolonged heat dome gripping a huge portion of the country, elevated fire weather returning to the drought-stressed West, a flash flood risk sitting on top of already saturated ground, and a hurricane season that may be quieter on paper, but is still fully capable of producing a devastating landfall. With little warning, you start to understand why meteorologists keep using words like historic and dangerous this month. This isn't fear for the sake of clicks. This is what an atmosphere loaded with extra heat and extra moisture actually looks like when it starts caching in that energy all at once, across multiple regions, in overlapping waves. So what do you actually do with all of this? First, if you live anywhere within that severe weather corridor stretching from the northern plains through the upper Midwest and into the central plains over the coming days, know your shelter plan right now? Before the storms arrive, not while the sirens are already going off. An interior room on the lowest floor of your home, away from windows, is your safest bet if you don't have a basement. Second, if hail starts falling anywhere near you, get indoors immediately. Stones large enough to be called damaging can shatter windshields and injure anyone caught outside in seconds. Third, if you're in an area under any kind of flood watch or warning, remember the simple rule that saves more lives than almost any other piece of weather advice. Never drive through a flooded roadway. It takes shockingly little moving water to sweep a vehicle off the road, and you cannot judge the depth of water at night or from inside a car. Fourth, if you're anywhere in the heat dome zone, take the extreme heat seriously, even if you don't feel like you're the type who struggles in hot weather. Stay hydrated, check on elderly neighbors and relatives, and never leave children or pets in a parked vehicle, even for a few minutes, even with the windows cracked. And finally, if you live along the Gulf Coast or the Atlantic seaboard, don't let a quieter seasonal forecast lull you into skipping your hurricane preparations this year. Build your kit, know your evacuation zone, and keep an eye on the tropics regardless of what the seasonal outlook says, because forecasts describe probabilities, not guarantees. The pattern driving all of this, the heat dome, the repeated rounds of severe storms, the fire risk out west, isn't expected to break down quickly. Extended forecasts show this ridge holding firm and even strengthening in places over the coming days, which means the ingredients for more dangerous weather are going to keep regenerating rather than clearing out. That's really the core message here. This isn't a single headline event you can watch pass by on the radar and then move on from. It's a stretch of weeks where the atmosphere has loaded up enough heat and moisture to keep producing dangerous weather in waves, sometimes in the same places twice, sometimes shifting to catch communities that thought they were in the clear. Stay alert, stay informed through your local National Weather Service office in the days ahead, and take these warnings seriously even when the sun is shining and the sky looks calm. Because with a pattern like this one, calm can turn violent faster than most people expect. If this kept you informed, subscribe so you don't miss the next update. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, and stay safe out there.